Hi, I'm Obi, and I have been doing some reading. However, not as much as I could have been. I've been prepping for Curse of Strahd. I'm going to be DMing, so that's gonna be fun. D&D stuff. I tried to find some manga to read. I really, really want to read D. Gray Man, but I can't get a hold of the manga, and I could get the more available parts first, but there's no telling if the non-available ones will come up, and I'm not even sure if I like the material, so that's a risk I'm not willing to take. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Little Mushroom Judgment Day. It was kind of an impulse buy, an impulse drop, because it really wasn't my type of story. I interpreted the main character as kind of like a shape-shifting Myconid, D&D lore, and it's this like a post-apocalyptic fantasy, which I wasn't expecting. But this Myconid man, he's on a quest to go find his spore that was stolen by the humans, and so he engages with humans in a way that he hadn't before because he's, a monster. Trigger warning for sexual assault in like the first couple pages. Beyond that, I have no idea, so at your own risk, I guess. So I also read one called Corrupting the Heroine's First Love, which I apparently never read the summary for, or it's irrelevant, because it was not at all what I anticipated it to be. Our main character, Karina, is a reincarnated species created by a lich. Their father creates these chimera demons by splicing humans with like archdemons, and so it creates this new creature, and they're his generals. And so as far as like reincarnated Villainess stories go, this is not schoolgirl prank drama stuff. No, she murders by the thousands. No, she's a real Villainess, and she's not messing around. This is survival for her. So normally in a manhwa with this similar title or a light novel, you would expect more like rom-com elements or like schoolgirl drama or intrigue sometimes, but not just like straight up war butchery and actual demonic elements to like this extent, and like liches. So this is not fluffy, it's intense. We've got liches, bitches, so get used to that. Evading the Duke's Love. The title of this one is misleading. It should probably be Obtaining the Duke's Love, because that's what it is. She literally proposes a relationship contract with him, which I feel like shouldn't be a spoiler. That happens all the time in these kind of stories. It isn't bad, but it's not necessarily good either. It reminds me a little bit of My Happy Marriage, in that the main character's like defining trait that's kind of toxic is how timid and muted and submissive they are, and that's what's alluring. And so that's kind of mildly problematic. In My Happy Marriage, they're both kind of awkward and they grow together, and that's really sweet. In this one, it's just her, and he's fine and is socially apt and everything. So like it feels more of like that slightly troubling aspect is a slightly more troubling than My Happy Marriage. If you're reading My Happy Marriage and you want something else in between, this one might scratch that itch. It is sweet. It is kind of innocent, and it has a lot of pain and, trauma that they're working on and stuff. So like it might do the trick. It didn't for me, but that's fine. The Princess's Smile. The body double bride searches for happiness with the reclusive prince. True to its title, It's exactly that. A body double for a princess goes to another country to marry a prince. Not the crown prince, as is usual in these stories, but the second prince, I guess, or just a normal-ass prince. The ones that become dukes or whatever instead of princes. The brothers. But what I liked about this one is how slowly it progressed and how soft the interactions were with the characters. And that really felt like the writer's strength. Was the kind of opening up of tense situations. And what they weren't so strong at was the ending. I felt like the big plot points and like the big dramatic, reveals and stuff were not their strengths. The end felt kind of plastic. It's like you could sense the writer saying to themselves, my character is too good to get revenge, but I can and I will. And just things like, I don't want to write a scene with too many characters, so I'm gonna introduce one character at a time and they're each gonna end up having violence put upon them by the main hero because they deserve it. And again, my main character is too good for violence, so he can do it. And I mean, that's all fine. That's fine. It's just, I don't normally feel like I can discern the writers so clearly within writing as I can in the points where they're not as strong. Which, I mean, it's still a good story. I relatively liked it, and it's not bad. It's just, I think the ending was a little bit lacking. 7th time loop Villainess enjoys a carefree life. Rishi is reincarnated in her 7th life, and this time she decides to be engaged to the man who killed her previously. Not in like 1 of 7, the most recent one. Like moments ago she was murdered, she reincarnated, and now she's engaged to this man. And so there's some tension there, but they kind of overcome it, and it's sweet, and they work on it. And this one I liked because of how important her other lives were and what she learned and kind of that accumulation of knowledge, and how all those little things like made her stronger kind of in different situations, and how they were implemented. I thought that was kind of neat. This one felt oddly familiar. Like, I just hauntingly deja vu familiar, and I'm wondering if back whenever Wattpad hadn't taken down all of the light novels that had been put up there, I'm wondering if this was one of those. And I'll never know, because they're gone now. But, I'm excited to continue it, even if it felt kind of oddly, so jarringly familiar, despite having never read it. I also read most of a series of Yuri light novels. They're each like only a little over 100 pages, and the first one is A Kiss of Light and Flame. This one is about a holy maiden, the symbol of triumph over witches, and a witch. One thing that I really liked about it is how little everyone cared about their relationship, as in like them being two women, so much as they cared about the fact that the holy maiden needed to produce an heir. So had the witch been a man, they wouldn't have cared, and had the holy maiden not been the holy maiden, they wouldn't have cared. It just had to do with the fact that the holy maiden specifically had to produce an heir. The love did progress a little bit quickly, but also it's only 100-something pages, and they're both extremely traumatized. So those, tend to mean that has to move fast. It's a sweet little story. It's kind of cute, and I liked it. And then there was A Kiss of Death and Rebirth, in which a necromancer, near the end of her life, because they kind of die young because of their power, creates a golem to help her out so that she can kind of ease into the end and, make it easier for her. But what she creates isn't exactly a normal golem. and just kind of their relationship together and the short time that they have is, it's sweet, but it's sorrowful. This one, even as I was reading it, I expected to pull some punches. No, it was an emotional bar fight that it was going for, and I was thinking pro wrestling, and it was just not, it was not faking out when it said what it said. So, I think part of why it was so sorrowful is because I was so expecting something else and ended up with exactly what it promised. So, and then there's a kiss of iron and yew, as in like yew, the bow tree branch thing. So sword and bow. The commander and her assistant are the only survivors of an incident of their company as a war is tying up, and so they go on a path of revenge together, and they're joined by a knight. And at this point, I realized that the knight from the very first story and the second story would become a recurring character. It took the third time for me to get it. But it's kind of cool because it's not about him, it's about them. In every case. He was just kind of present as like a witness, I guess, or a chronicler, maybe. In theory, that could be how it's playing out. But it's not about him, so there's really not much need to care. But he's there. And this one's kind of nice because there's a lot of like time to like reassure each other in this one, the two women, because there's a lot of like class differences and it's just a hurdle for them, and so they just kind of keep reassuring each other and talking to each other and being there for each other, and it's just sweet. And they're all sweet, these stories. I think I have one more to read, and I'll get to that so I can tell you about it, but I do recommend them, all of these little stories. I also read some novels, like books, not light novels. I read A Conjuring of Light, which is the last book in the series A Darker Shade of Magic, which includes also A Gathering of Shadows. I read the first two in the first half of the last book like over a year ago, and I just stopped halfway through the last book, and I don't know why I do that, but I do sometimes. And so I tanked the last half in like a night, and yeah. Here we are, the end of a trilogy, a year later. The trilogy... The world in this trilogy is interesting to me. I love London. It's like my favorite place in the world. And this one has 3 of them. Well, technically 4. There's red, white, gray, and technically black London as well. Our main character, Kel, is a rather strange and unique magician. He can travel between the different Londons, except for Black London, which has been sealed off because it's got evil magic in it. And, well, evil magic isn't quite the way to put it, but that's fine. Easier to understand. And then the story starts whenever Kel meets a rather odd girl, and it's their unique interactions together that causes the following events. It did feel weird to kind of pick up the book like halfway through, at the very end, because I remembered Kel, and I remembered the relationship with his brother, and I remembered the bi-pirate very clearly, and I remember the girl, but there were many characters I didn't remember, and as things happened to them in the end of the book, I didn't feel anything. It didn't matter to me. And so that was kind of sad. One thing that I really, really liked about this series, and it reminded me again whenever I went back, is I love Kel. And now that, you know, it's been a year later, I've watched Critical Role, or, well, the second season, not the first one or the third one. But Kel reminds me of Caleb. Like a much younger Caleb, and, you know, we get to be there for his big traumas for the most part. Of course, I loved Alucard too, the bi-pirate. I delightful character. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find fantasy fans who don't enjoy the series. This series, my bad. I forgot to go get it before. Can you tell that I'm tired and I'm filming at night like I shouldn't be? It is kind of a violent series, so maybe not for the younger crowds, but that's fine. Adults have to have books too. And you know, I would argue that some of Redwall is pretty violent, and I read that really young, so. Graceling. This one I picked up because the synopsis reminded me of an old Wattpad story that I read, and really loved, but it didn't take long to figure out that it wasn't anything like that at all. I did kind of go into it just a little bit more negatively than I should have, because I had seen it in Barnes & Noble on, like, a shelf with a bunch of, like, low-grade young adult stories, which is aloof and elitist, I know, but I can't help it. We're people, we're human, you know, it's hard not to think like that. But I actually really enjoyed it. This is a story about Katza, the ward of the king, who manifested a particularly unique ability that makes her skilled in the art of killing. Her role is not a lady of the court, as a normal ward lady would be, but as an executioner, and a torturer, and, you know, whatever the cruel king desires her to be. And I like about the story most is that it roams. By the time that I finished this book, and I was looking back on what had happened in the book, it felt like they had gone some huge distance. Like, I could imagine it like a D&D map. Like, the hexes they had crossed was a swath of land, you know what I mean? It took us on quite a journey. The trait of grace abilities is kind of interesting. For some people who have it, it's like magic, like they can like read minds and do incredible things, and for others it's just they cook real good and that's it. And so it kind of has this unique trait of being like kind of like magic focused, because our main characters have graces, but it's still like a low magic swords fantasy. It's a very physical fantasy, if that makes sense, and that's kind of fun and unique because it still has that magic element, and I like that. I like that it has that hint of magic. Almost like the way that traditional stories are, where like there'll be like a witch. But there's just one witch in the woods, and, you know, she doesn't really do much. She makes like a potion every now and then. And like that's the whole magic of like an Arthur story, basically. Where like there's like one guy who's kind of immortal, unless you cut off his head. Then he's dead. That's his whole magic. Like, I like that. I like that a lot. I don't know why. Low magic is interesting. I also read Dance of Thieves. Why did I pick this up? The description of the male character reminded me of Diluc from Genshin Impact. Diluc is also the reason I picked up that game. And the reason I started reading this book. And of course, I bought his velvet suit the day it came out. I'm an easy person to understand. Our main character is a street urchin who won the favor of the queen and became one of her trained personal guards. The queen sends her to suss out an outlaw town, kind of on the border, and figure out what their deal is, because some things have been going on. And it's run by like a mafia family. So, like, there's definitely some things going on. It is a no magic mafia. In fact, it is a no magic world. It is implied that the ancients had magic at some point, but that would make this a post-magic world, which is an interesting take. It could also be a post-technology world. Unclear. And in a way, that's more interesting, because if it was post-technology, wouldn't they think that the technology was magic in a way? I mean, I would think so. But, yeah. It also has romance. You could almost call it a romance novel, but any good novel has a hint of romance, right? So it's more of a intrigue? Adventure? No, I would say intrigue, maybe. It's not political though, it's just like relationships and social interaction intrigue, kind of. As she's navigating dealing with this mafia family, essentially, and learning about their town and how they do things, and getting to know the main character, male lead, and then dealing with, you know, political problems, trying to not implicate her queen into any of the shenanigans they get into, because she is directly related to the queen. It's just an interesting story. I like it a lot. It also helps that I was imagining him as Diluc the whole time, so what can I say? I'm an easy sell. I also read Cinder. I had heard the name Marissa Meyer because I had been watching BookTube, but I couldn't remember if it was in a negative or a positive context, and then I read it, and now I assume it was a positive context. Cinder is a cyborg and a mechanic. She was adopted into a fallen family, and one day the kingdom's prince stops by to her mechanic shop and asks her to fix something. From there, things kind of fall apart and also click into place. The loose fairy tale inspiration is Cinderella. Now, it may be unclear based on how much I rant about the genre, but I love good cyberpunk. And I'm talking about, like, not sexist, not misogynistic, no inference that women are objects or worthless or tools. I'm talking, like, good cyberpunk. And it's rare. And that's sad. But this right here is good cyberpunk, and that's what makes the world better. So I can't recommend it highly enough. I loved it. I loved it so much. It also had a unique feeling that was almost like nostalgic, like, and I think good it's a Freudian slip. I think good cyberpunk has that, like, 90s anime feel of, I mean, cyberpunk originated with, like, Asian cultures and interpretation of Asian cultures into science fiction, but the feel was kind of a mix of Land of the Lustrous, Yokohama Station, and The Fifth Element, which are all really, really good energies. I would point out specific scenes that gave me those energies, but there would be spoilers. So, one odd thing about this book is how much people hated the cyborgs. And I interpreted Cinder's appendages as, like, Ed's automail in Fullmetal Alchemist. And sure, people tend to be kind of perturbed by his automail, but it's more like anguish and pity and just this, like, horror of what he must have had to go through in order to get that. Whereas if for her, it's like disgust. People are disgusted. And that, it just didn't click with me. And I know that it needed to be there for the story and stuff, but because of how I was raised with having watched Fullmetal Alchemist, I thought all I could feel for her was that kind of, like, pity and sympathy whenever it mentioned, you know, her arms and stuff. So yeah, that was an odd kind of disconnect that I felt, but I guess it only made her more empathetic, so that's great. Very good book, highly recommend. I also read Scarlet, the second book in the Lunar Chronicles series. It splits focus between Cinder and the newly introduced Scarlet. Without giving too much away about Cinder's story, She's on the run, and she's seeking answers. Scarlet lives an idyllic life in a country town with her grandmother. However, her grandmother has gone missing, and so she's on a quest to try and find her grandmother, with the help of a new runaway gang member in town who could have the answers. Nothing could go wrong. The loose fairy tale inspiration in this one is Little Red Riding Hood. One thing I will say, although this one I think is my favorite so far of the series, I interpreted Wolf very differently visually. Like, I was more than halfway through whenever I realized that they had, like, these cover photos on the inside, and the way they portrayed Wolf is nothing like what I was thinking. I was kind of imagining him as somewhere between Orlok from P4A and Keith from Voltron. So very handsome and in my own tastes. But apparently he looks just like a normal dude, just like a handsome guy, which is not the fantasy. Still, I love this one, admittedly with my own version of Wolf being the ideal character. I still loved Scarlet so much, and I highly recommend it. I also read Cress, which is the third book of the Lunar Chronicle series. It splits focus between the Cinder and the crew's continued story and the briefly previously mentioned Cress. Cress is a shell, which is a lunar without the mental sciences that they're generally born with. As far as we've been told to this point, all of them are either killed off at birth or smuggled to Earth. Cress, however, is a genius hacker living in a satellite prison. The loose fairy tale reference is Rapunzel. This one did something that unsettled me. They split the party. Which is fine. Stories do that. I just didn't like it. I was just like, oh god, no, don't do that. They did it from, like, the beginning. This one did do something that I didn't like, and that was it had a pretty substantial age gap. Thorn, I interpreted as, like, a generally handsome, slightly older guy, but the thing is that Cress, I interpret as much younger. And she's like 15 or 16, and he's like 20, 21. Which is not ideal, but not troubling, except for the fact that she's barely had any human interaction. And so she's probably mentally much, much younger. And not mature and wise for her age, as though that was an excuse. And I mean, he can't really be faulted because he himself sees the problems, and he's very aware that grooming could be an issue. And 5 years isn't that big of an age gap, but it just feels so not great. Like, there's so much in these books that are great that I'm like, why? Why did we have to go here? Why did we have to do this? Why was this necessary? So I didn't like that. I didn't like that at all. And as it kept going, I was like, let's stop. Let's not do this. I want to go back to Wolf and Scarlet being cute and the awkward interactions of Cinder and whatever his main character name is. I done forgot, but it's fine. He's not in some of these as much. I did start Winter, and it took me a while to realize that the reference was Snow White. Took me a while. But I got about halfway through, and I did that thing where I stopped reading it again. Just like I did with A Gathering of Shadows, and A Conjuring of Light, and... what is the first one called? A Darker Shade of Magic. So, eventually I'll finish that. Who knows if it'll be next year or not. Not me. I actually have like a ton of books to read. I don't know if you can... Nope. Nope. Yeah, it's part of my book stack that I need to read. So I've got a lot of books. I just got The Rise of Darkness, and I just got the prequel for Accomplishments of a Duke's Daughter, and I've got the second prequel in order. So I'm pretty excited about that. I do have D&D stuff to prep for, and I will be pretty focused on that because I'm going to be running 2 games as my first time DMing, which is kind of bonkers. But we'll see how that goes, and if I keep reading, and if not, maybe I'll get into like D&D content or something. I started rewatching WebDM and Matt Colville, and I found another girl who was interesting to read. I'm sorry, watch. So I've been doing that, and I recommend all of them if you're into D&D. But yeah, that was all that I read. For now. And probably for a little while. Bye!